Welcome back from a short break. You're still watching ACFIM Talks. We're discussing the National Budget 2022. And the bigger question is it responsive to the skyrocketing prices? And with me, I have Moses Mlondo. Moses, but also the president of the Uganda Parliamentary Press Association and a senior reporter. Before we went for a break, Moses given us a bit of a analysis of the budget, what these figures mean, what the 48.1 trillion mean, how it has been cut and shared across the different sectors. The reason why I think it's important for me to go to the next question is it's all about, okay, we seem to be entering into a phase of having an unsustainable debt. And almost everybody knows for a fact that I think our appetite for borrowing is unquenchable. If anybody out there pragmatically would say, okay, is it possible we can live within our means? If we are collecting 25 trillion, can we budget according to 25 trillion, be more frugal with our resources, reduce wastage? Part of wastage is into address corruption and all that. And again, here we are again, when you look at the budget, because the figures tell you that out of the 48.1 trillion, government is going to borrow, it will only be able to raise 25. It will borrow 7.1 domestic borrowing, and then probably around 2.1 external borrowing, grants. Again, we are borrowing. What is the problem? Why do we have a country that is continuously run on borrowing? And how sustainable can this be? And this is why I bring you in, Moses. Why don't we just live within our means? Is that so difficult for us to achieve?
Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, you proceed.
Okay. First of all, the biggest challenge we have as a country is the cost of public administration. And that is actually explains why our budget for recurrent expenditures is a whopping 34 trillion. Over the years, government has been creating so many administrative units, so many local governments, even government entities, so many government agencies have been created, many of them actually duplicating work that is already being done by another government entity, by a government ministry. And of course, even government is aware of this dilemma, and that is why they have a plan of merging government entities. But this has been there for the last 5 years. They have been dragging their feet. It looks like they have failed to do it. I can give you an example. The budget for local governments in the next financial year, their current budget is 3.6 trillion for all local governments, for paying salaries, wages, administrative costs. It is 3.6 trillion. But the budget for development expenditures is only 900 billions. It's not even a trillion. 900 billions for development expenditures for all the local governments in the country. But their recurrent budget is 3.6 trillion. In fact, I saw a report sometime back which indicated that about 80% of the money that is sent to the local government goes into paying salaries and administrative costs. When you look at Parliament, our Parliament has been expanding over the years. A few years ago, the budget for Parliament was only 200 billions. Today, it is approaching 900 billions. Even State House. A few years ago, the budget for State House was about 150 billions. Today, the budget for State House is in the range of 700 billions. When you add on the money for office of the president, it is approaching 1 trillion. And this is, I saw in the minority report for the opposition, it was Semju who presented that part. He was suggesting that we need to cut the budget for we spend on the presidency, both State House and office of the president, and reallocate that money and spend it on much more pressing needs the country has, like the health sector. For the basic facilities in many health centers are not there. Ultrasound machines, which would greatly help in reducing maternal health. Most of the health centers do not have ultrasound machines. So the cost of public administration for our country is so high. Maybe it will require a new government, like you saw what happened in Tanzania when Magufuli took over, and he undertook a number of radical reforms for reducing the cost of public administration in Kenya, including stopping travels abroad. His argument was that if you need any information in any other country, we have ambassadors in those countries. Use our missions abroad to get that information. And that is why Magufuli was able to turn around the economy of Tanzania in a very short period of time. So as a country, I don't know whether we shall need a new government, but even this government can do it. That's through soul searching and making reforms. I remember in the history of Buganda Kingdom, there was a king called Mukaria who did some soul searching. He was very cruel. He did some soul searching and reformed, and even he's changed his name from Mukaria to Mutesa. So our government, it is not yet too late for them to make some radical reforms, especially on the area of the cost of public administration. You have seen public uproar on the 193 billions Parliament added on their budget, which had not been allocated to them. And the reports indicate that this is money for enhancing their allowances. So the cost of public administration for our country, it is too high, because for a small country that has meager resources with a very small revenue, with a very small, very low tax to GDP ratio of 13%, we should not be having a very high cost of public administration. So that is an area where we shall need to undertake radical reforms. I saw even when Parliament reallocated 1.6 trillion, I looked at the breakdown and quantified it. Still, the bulk of their reallocations were going towards recurrent expenditures, not government expenditures. So you can really see that we have a big challenge with our political establishment, both the executive and the legislature. And many times, by the way, the two, can I use connive? Maybe let me use the word collaborate. The two all often collaborate in allocating money to themselves, and that's why I'm telling you, maybe it will require a new government to come in place and undertake radical reforms. Look at the size of our cabinet, 8 cabinet ministers. We don't need all those ministers. They have big convoys that spend a lot of money. So we need radical reforms in that area for our budget to be restructured to be more realistic.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Indeed, thank you so much. Indeed, I think we are victims of political patronage. This is patronage politics. When you have so many administrative structures and you're spending so much on recurrent budget, and I think that's where we are as a country. And this brings me to the next question that is looking at the all aspect of supplementary budgeting, because there have been arguments, and people, a number of them are now arguing that probably budgeting in Uganda is ceremonial. It's just to fulfill the constitutional requirements. It's just to tick the boxes. Because when you look at our behavior in terms of the way we spend and utilize our budget has nothing to do with the way we budget. We make the budget. We didn't have budget discipline, and that probably explains why we are constantly every after 3 months. So and now this begs the question whether do we do budget for the sake of budgeting, or do we do budget for its actual purpose? Does budgeting still have does it still have a place of relevance, looking at the way we manage our budgets, but also looking at the way we exercise budget discipline?
That's a very good question. It actually speaks to poor planning and the budgeting discipline. There is a very big variance actually between what is budgeted for and the actual execution. I can tell you, I saw a report indicating that UNRWA is struggling with a debt of close to 600 billions, which is also attracting a lot of interest. In their report, they were indicating that the more they delay to pay money, it is attracting interest of about 250 millions, either every day or every month. It was a lot of money. And that what caused that is because their budgets were cut. You see, usually money is allocated in the national budget, but in the course of implementing, the Ministry of Finance, in most cases on directives from the executive, from cabinet, usually cuts the budget, especially when they are generating the supplementary budget you've been talking about. Because many times the money for supplementary budgets is got from cutting budgets for other entities, and many times the works and transport sector has been suffering because of that. And because of that, UNRWA now has a debt of close to 600 billions to contractors that they have failed to fully pay because their budgets were cut. And when these budgets are cut, unfortunately, still the bulk of the supplementary budgets go in recurrent expenditures like classified budget, the state house, defense. So that is an area. At some point, we were grilling Keith Mwakanis when he was the secretary to the treasury on the issue of supplementary budgets. And you know, sometimes he speaks the truth. He said, this is beyond my control. I am also concerned about it, but when you are there and you get a directive from State House, what do you do? So he was shifting the blame to the political leaders, that they are the ones that are responsible for that indiscipline. So supplementary budgets, which are a reflection of budgeting discipline and poor planning, majorly can be blamed on the political leaders, but they are creating a very big problem because in many cases, you can imagine now, money for works and transport, roads are very fundamental in building a firm foundation of economic development, but not only by the works and transport, so many other sectors usually suffer, their budgets are cut and money is reallocated. You see, in the budget for the next financial year, classified expenditure is 1.9 trillion, but by the time we shall end the financial year, that budget will have increased because there will be a supplementary somewhere in the course of the financial year for classified expenditure. So again, that is one weak area of our national budget, which needs to be fixed.
Thank you so much. We're still watching ACFIM Talks. I'm with Moses Mulondo, who is a budget expert, also the president of Uganda Parliamentary Press Association. And you can be part of this conversation by joining us on our social media platforms. You can drop a question. We are live on ACFIM, Facebook ACFIM, and YouTube ACFIM Uganda, and also on our Twitter handle at ACFIM UG. You can ask your questions and we'll be able to respond to them. My other issue, which I think is important we discuss, Moses, is around, and let me quickly roll it back to you gave a very good breakdown on the 1.7 trillion that has been allocated towards the wealth creation. And you see any other person who picks this budget, because it's giving you block figures, you'd ask yourself, where do I fit into this budget? And if I'm an ordinary Ugandan and a taxpayer, I would ask myself, how does this budget make sense to me first, personally? And when I was looking at the figures you're raising, how much is going to PDM, Emyoga, and the capitalization of UDP, of course, and how much is going to ECD, Uganda Coffee Development Authority. I'm still a bit struggling to connect an ordinary Ugandan who is battered by the current situation to all these opportunities. And some have argued that the challenge with these very many wealth creation programs is that they tend to be hijacked by politics. What's your take on this one?
Yes, of course, politics can always be there. Before I answer that question, I had left out the Small Business Recovery Fund, which is to the tune of 200 billions, which is part of those wealth creation funds. Government has contributed 100 billions, and the commercial banks are also adding another 100 billions. So small-scale businesses that may not have collateral security and other requirements that UDP usually requires can benefit from that arrangement, and it has been put in place as part of the government measures for resuscitating the economy. I also forgot to tell you that Uganda Development Corporation, UDC, which is the investment arm of government, has been allocated about 46 billions, also as part of initiatives for improving the economic welfare of Ugandans. And of course, the UDC usually establishes factories in different parts of the country. When UDC was being restored in 2016, there was a commitment from Parliament and the Executive to capitalize it with 500 billion, which is yet to be fulfilled, because 46 billion is just like a drop. It can only be spent on one or two factories. It's not a lot of money. So, and yet, that is an area which would, you see, so many Chinese companies that are constructing roads here in Uganda and different parts of the world are state-owned farms, state-owned by the state of China. So as a country, one of the remedies that you even in answering what you've talked about, these initiatives of Emyoga, handouts and what have you, of course, they are not, from the point of economics, they are not an effective way of turning around an economy. The necessary measures should be towards UDC, towards UDB, ensuring that government, like in NDP, the government had promised to restore the Uganda Commercial Bank, the cooperative bank, but they have not yet taken any measures to do that, because that would greatly help us to bring down the cost of borrowing money, because our interest rates are still very high. Many other countries we are competing with, even the investors that we compete with, they get credit at as low as 2%, 3% from their countries. But here, interest rates are still very high, and the measures that government needs to put in place, like restoring state-owned banks have not yet been undertaken. Kenya, they still have their Kenya commercial banks, and it is actually dominating East Africa. It's in Uganda, it's in South Sudan, it's in DR, it's all over, and it is greatly helping them. So government and parliament need to seriously allocate enough money to UDC to establish factories in different parts of the country. Even this money government that was, and the incentives they were giving to Pinet and Liquor to start a coffee factory here, that assistance support should have been given to UDC to start and to work with through private public partnership, to work with other investors who are already there in the country to establish a coffee factory. So government needs to fulfill that commitment that made to allocate at least 500 billions to UDC as an investment arm of government to create state-owned enterprises, to create factories in different parts of the country, which will create a number of jobs and even improve our revenues, our revenue collections, and greatly turn around our economy. But back to your question of these wealth creation funds, of course, they can greatly help to turn around the incomes, individual incomes of Ugandans who are in groups. Kenyans have so many circles. They have been successful in that area of cooperatives and circles. You find circles in Kenya that have billions of money, and it has greatly improved the economic welfare of the people of Kenya. So even here it is possible. A few years ago, like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, Parliament passed a resolution to exempt circles from paying taxes. So, and the motivation for doing that was that they had discovered this would be an effective way of empowering Ugandans economically. So, and I think that is why in the budget for the next financial year, Parliament has added 35 billions to microfinance support center for giving out grants, donations to different circles that will be created. But you also need to remember that the parish development model is going also to be anchored on that basis of people being in groups that are involved in the production and they are funded. So people have to create circles, people have to create cooperatives. That is the direction that we are taking. So which is a commendable intervention. Ugandans need to be sensitized on how to, need to be empowered on financial literacy and how to manage circles and cooperatives. I have seen even in the reallocations Parliament, it again they put in place about 25 billions for giving to cooperatives in different parts of the country to empower them. So that is a step in the right direction, because many countries have registered, like I have said, Kenya, many countries have registered a lot of progress in having organized groups of citizens involved in economic activities in the form of circles and the cooperatives.
All right. Indeed. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Indeed. That's the way to go. Even I think I was looking at China, how China developed. It invested so much in local entrepreneurship and industries, and I think that's where Uganda needs to start focusing. My other question, as our time is fast spent, is around looking at the way this budget has been organized and how allocations have been made. It's around the budget priorities. You partly touched it in when you were trying to lay a case, make a foundation on your quick thoughts on how the budget, on what you thought was how the budget looked like. But now I was quickly looking at some of the least funded. You partly touched them. And for example, I looked at tourism vis-a-vis its contribution to the GDP, which is, I think tourism brings in about 5.6 trillion towards the coffers. But when you look at how much is allocated, it's much, much less. And my question here is around, if you were to prioritize, if let's assume you had been given opportunity as a budget expert to allocate, to cut this budget and prioritize. Why do you think we should have put most of our resources in terms of budget allocations? Your quick thoughts.
That's a very good question. From the economics knowledge and business knowledge that I have, of course, as a country, our major comparative advantage in the global arena is in agriculture. 43% of East Africa's arable land is in Uganda. Arable land is where you can successfully grow crops and you get the yields that you want. So Uganda has potential to actually become a global food basket. But our government is not yet adequately investing in the agriculture sector. Even the very commitment that was made in 2003 in the Maputo Protocol of African governments allocating a minimum of 10% of their national budgets to agriculture, we have not yet even reached a half. Our allocation is still below 5%. So that is an area I would cut money from security and reduce the cost of public administration and put more money in stimulating agricultural production. Because even when you look at the volume of our exports, which I have told you have exponentially grown from $253 million in 1992 to now $6.6 billion, which is about 23 trillion. The bulk of our exports actually are agricultural exports. So it tells you that as a country, we would get a lot of money, even a lot of foreign exchange, if we invested so much in stimulating agricultural production, put in place tractors at all levels, at all parishes, so that our people don't have to use rudimentary tools of farming, and all the other necessary facilities, invest in irrigation. But our government has not yet taken that seriously. The other sector where we have comparative advantage is tourism, because our country is exceptionally naturally endowed. Actually, in my Master of Business Administration, my research was on Uganda's tourism sector, and I discovered a lot. There have been so many international agencies that have ranked Uganda as one of the top 5 tourism destinations in the world, and their ranking was based on the level of tourism attractions that are outstanding that we have as a country. Among the top 5, some of these agencies include the Lonely Planet, Rough Guides, and even CNN. On many occasions, they have ranked us as one of the top 5 tourism destinations in the world. But when it comes to the actual number of tourists coming in, we are not even among the top 30 countries in the world with the highest number of tourists. And there are so many reasons, one of which I gave, that when you look at the budget for marketing our tourism, only $2 million. Our neighbors like Kenya, Rwanda, $25 and $35 million. France, which is not even among the top 5 tourism destinations ranked in the rankings of those agencies I have talked about, they annually get about 84 million tourists. But for us, we are still in the range of slightly above 1 million tourists. So Uganda has enormous potential in that area of tourism to get a lot of money. Of course, the other challenge we have as a country, apart from a smaller budget allocated to that sector, is the image we have internationally, that our governance still has the challenges. Whenever they see bullets being fired, people being tear gassed, people being killed on our streets, those chaotic scenes, they scare away so many tourists from coming to our country. So that is another area where we have to improve as a country. If we can improve our governance, if we can improve our democracy and improve our image internationally, it will attract more tourists to come to our country. It's an area, even from the research I did, it's an area where we need to improve as a country, that we have to make measures to make improvements in our democracy and our governance, so that the image of our country, and that also actually has a direct bearing link to our FDI, which has been declining over the years, foreign direct investments. We've not been attracting premium investors, especially from Europe and USA, to come here and put in place investments, partly because of the image of our country in the global arena. There is a thinking outside there that this is a country that is politically chaotic, that is under dictatorship, where there is no freedom, where political opponents are oppressed, many in jail. Even us journalists, on many occasions, our press freedom is greatly violated. In fact, the recent Press Freedom Index report indicates that our ranking has worsened. We have moved from position 115 to 125. So those indicators, people who want to invest in different countries look at such indicators, and when they realize that the political risk is very high, like in our country, those premium big investors in those countries like Europe and America cannot come to invest here. So that is an area that we have to address as a country to make sure that we improve our democracy and governance. So those two sectors, the other sectors that we have greatly neglected as a country is ICT. ICT is the fastest growing sector in the world, with potential to create millions of jobs. In America, one ICT company like Apple is worth $1,000 billion. $1,000 billion, which is $1 trillion. That is actually higher than the entire economy of East Africa. Our economy is only $45 billion. So you can see the enormous potential in the ICT sector. But our country is greatly, our government is greatly stifling it, actually, even through some of the policies, like the taxes they introduced. Recently, they introduced the 12% excise duty on internet data, which has actually made our internet to be the most expensive in the world. In fact, in the whole of Africa, it is only Uganda and Zambia that have introduced taxes that limit access to internet. And because of that, when OTT was introduced, our access to internet dropped from 48% to 33%. Kenya has left us in that area and greatly commended in the global arena. Kenya's access to internet is now the highest in Africa at 83%. But our access to internet has dropped to even 33% because of these taxes that limit access to internet. By the way, globally, taxes that limit access to internet are greatly discouraged. Any country that wants to get to register progress in the ICT revolution cannot put taxes on internet. But here, I know from my investigations, even experts in the Ministry of ICT and the Ministry of Finance discouraged the government from introducing OTT. But the executive cabinet did not listen. So that is an area where, as a country, we are not putting enough. We need to invest enough in the ICT sector because it has potential to create millions of opportunities for our young Ugandans. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. That was really, really quite very, very, very resourceful. And this brings us to the close of today's edition of ACFIM Talks. And I was having Moses Mulondo making sense of this budget. Moses Mulondo is the president for Uganda Parliamentary Press Association, a senior reporter, and also a budget expert. And we've been discussing the national budget 2022-2023. and answering the bigger question whether this budget is realistic, responsive, especially in the current context of the skyrocketing prices. And I myself, Felix Kafuma, was the moderator. Until next week, bye-bye, take care, stay blessed.